The theme is transitions. When I thought about this congregation, that's the first thing that came to my mind. And then when I thought further, I realized the word transitions shows up in so many different contexts. Now it's June. For those of you who didn't notice, it's Pride Month for LGBTQs, who are certainly more than welcome here. And the T in LGBTQ stands for trans, or transition. And so I figured I had to address that first and momentarily change Stoltz, or at least add one. In Unitarian Universalism, not just lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and otherwise queer folks are welcome, they're also ministers. 1/4 of the ministers who in this recent church year were in search were trans. Not just the LGB, but the T. Lots of people are inspired, and it matters. It matters to be aware of their existence, their struggle, and ways to support them. As a quick review, a trans man is a person who was assigned female at birth, but later transitioned after discovering he was a male indeed. Most trans men use a male pronoun and a male name, so they are referred to he, him, his. Some choose the singular they pronoun, they, them, theirs. Now, a trans woman is a person who was assigned male at birth and later transitioned to live as her true gender, female, usually using a female name and the pronouns she, her, hers, or they, them, theirs. Now, what's the deal about this assigned gender at birth? Gender is actually what we feel about ourselves. That's an inside job, but when a baby is born, doctors and parents look, and they know where to look, and then they have to decide on what they're seeing. For some babies, it seems quite apparent, male or female. For quite a few, well, actually about 2%, there's an untypical genital development. When that used to happen, doctors would immediately pull the parents aside and says, this is very important to repair now, and do surgery and turn it into female-looking genitalia, because that was always easier than the other way around. Now, when those people then grew up, those people who were actually intersex, having some characteristics of each to whatever level, and they grew up, and often in their childhood, if not in their teen years, 50% of them would say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't fit. I'm not female. What in the world did you do to me? Some of them identify as gender queer, having no specific leaning to female or male, they, them, theirs, usually, and some are very clear that they're male, but it's a bit late by then to undo the corrective surgery that removed some parts. So intersex people are quite common. Again, 1.7% or about 2%. That means in a congregation of this size that has about 150 members and friends who show up periodically, we have a handful of those. They might not tell us that. There's another group where it appeared that biologically their sex was quite easy to identify, and still at some point they say, wait a minute, whatever male name you gave me, and this male assigned doesn't fit. Inside, I'm actually female. Or the reverse, to those raised as girls and women who might suddenly go, wait a minute, I'm male. What happened? Those people might be referred to as transgender. Now, there are several things to do and several things not to do. People whose gender matches their sex and their name, which is many of you, are cisgender. That means there's a match. Instead of transgender, when those two things don't match. For those who are cisgender among you, imagine bad case scenario, you may have had a disease or accident, and suddenly any sexual distinctive marks are gone from your body. Are you still the gender you were before? Most of you would probably say yes. That doesn't change who you are. For genderqueer folks, there is no such feeling of being male or female, or there's at least a fluid moving back and forth across those identities. And for those who are transgender, there's a strong or stronger growing discontent and anxiety. Many trans folks did not or do not have support to even talk about this to anyone. I'm glad there's the internet now where support is able to be found. But statistically, many of them end up with severe depression. Many attempt suicide or commit suicide, and quite a few of them get murdered, especially Black trans women. Trans women of color get murdered at ridiculously high rates. So what do? We may well have trans people among us. What I learned is, I do not ask, so have you had surgery? Or what kind of hormones are you taking? Are these real? Because I wouldn't ask any cisgender person any of those questions either, because it's not kind. And for trans folks, it's especially painful. So what I usually do is find out their name and their preferred pronoun, and then I use it. That's it. I know it's complicated, especially with the them, they, their, or if somebody you knew used to go he, him, his, and now suddenly goes by a female name, deal with it. It is much more difficult to be trans and survive. And anybody who comes here deserves to know they're not only welcome, but supported. So that's my bit about Pride Week, where transitions also happen. But there are many other ways that word is used. In a business, for instance, if the corporate office says this company is going through transitions, usually the employees get scared because that usually means layoffs. So that can be scary. Another way some people use that term is instead of death. They're getting ready to transition, or they transitioned on this day, or ever since they transitioned, I'm so lonely. Personally, I'd rather talk about death and dying because that's much less obscure, and it's really not a dirty word. It is okay, despite our culture regrowing, to talk about what's happening. The only time I use a word like that as if I killed a fly or a mosquito or a scorpion. Then I say a mantra, Om Namah Shivaya, and I add happy transition. Om Namah Shivaya is Sanskrit and means I honor the divine in me and in you, including whatever annoying critter that was, and wish them well to wherever they might evolve to next, which I don't know. They probably don't know either. But that way I feel better about having harmed one of the creatures on this planet. So, I personally went through tons of different transitions. At age 19, I moved to the US from Europe, and I not only changed continents, I changed language from German to English. Then at age 22, after 10 years of struggling, I stopped trying to be straight. And I started coming out and telling people who I was, and that indeed I'd been attracted to females that whole time. Now that transition had some unforeseen transitions that happened. Ones that I could not control and was too naive to predict. Here I was in the US, and I knew people in the seminary I attended, and then the graduate school that was connected to the seminary. I knew friends, I had roommates, and suddenly there was nobody who was safe. I no longer had acquaintances and friends, and was quite on my own. My parents were very upset with me too. First of all, for not being straight, and secondly, for not moving right back to Germany. But there was a reason I had to move away from there. I didn't quite have enough room to expand and be who I was. And so I made new friends slowly, getting to know some of those LGBTQs, and ended up having a girlfriend, my first. Ta-da! She got accepted at the law school in Tucson, so I moved from California to Tucson. That was a cool transition. Tucson is now my hometown of choice for the last 36 years. So I appreciate that a lot. Then there was this transition of breakup once she was done with law school. And so that was, again, a tough one. After that, I was living all by myself in my house, and I was up for a different transition. Motherhood, of all things. I had checked before if I could foster or adopt a child, and in a relationship I could not at that time. And hey, there was something good about being single in that regard. So I finished my foster adopt training, and this wonderful little black girl named Hannah moved in. She was 9 at the time. She looked much younger than that. And she was AIDS patient. The first pediatric one in Arizona, since a prior family had moved her here. So here I was, from single to single mom. Actually, I like that transition. It was good to be a mother. It was good to get to know Hannah and be her mom for all those years, and she surprised us. They had told me maybe 2 years, 3 max, she would have left. She grew up. She moved out. She finished high school. She lived on her own for a bit. And we transitioned to empty nest. When Hannah was 13, we went from a 2-person family to a 3-person family. That was a cool transition. because that's when I met Melva, almost 28 years ago now. And we had a wedding more than 26 years ago. And yeah, we did the legal one later too. So we have lots of anniversaries, and it was suddenly a 3-person family. Once Hannah moved, it was just us 2 for a while. And here we thought, how about a sibling group? We knew there were many people, including Hannah, who had been separated from her siblings and never found them again. So here we adopted a group. The girl was just turning 5, and the boy was 3 months shy of being 3. So 2.5 and 5-year-old moved into our home, and Stephen and Clarissa were our children. Now, that was an interesting switch. Because we were 4 of us then. But within a few months, we were 5. And we hadn't expected that. We built on in a hurry as Hannah moved back in for hospice care. In the year 2000, there were too many transitions for us to process and handle. My mother-in-law passed away. One of our cats died, and most painful of all, Hannah died after 6 painful months of hospice. There were transitions in my work that were about to follow. You see, when I came out, I not only lost friends, I also lost the chance to be ordained, at least in the churches that I was attending at that time, and I got a counseling degree. So here I was, I'd had a full-time counseling practice for quite a while, and suddenly realized I can't see 32 clients a week. So I cut that in half, and then found a hobby that was good to keep me in balance: construction. I watched a lot of this old house and ended up buying fix-up properties and repairing them. So we still have 8 rentals at this point. Now, there I was working on that and still keeping up my counseling practice part-time. As our young children grew up, they went through more transitions than I can count. We did start attending a UU church. I soon became a worship associate, then a ministry student yet again, and an intern at UU Church of Tucson. Getting ordained was an amazing transition, and many of you were actually there for that. And then I served a congregation in Sierra Vista for 2 years, and part-time served a congregation in Glendale, West Valley UU. Last spring, I actually had 5 jobs. They were all part-time. I made sure I didn't go over 40 hours and that I always had at least 1 full day off. Workaholics Anonymous was my first 12-step group. But I managed the rentals, I had the counseling practice, I worked at West Valley UU, I taught an online course in CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education, for chaplains and new ministers, and I was a sabbatical minister with you here 2 Sundays a month, as well as pastoral care. So never boring, which is a good thing. But I suddenly realized I will need to stop that once June came. And then I did a transition I've never done before in my life. I stopped everything. The counseling practice, the repairs at the rentals, certainly serving congregations. I even stopped teaching my online course. And I figured I will just take 2-3 months as a sabbatical, self-financed though it had to be, and then I'll know what to do next. And after 3 months, I knew I needed more time. And after 6 months, same thing. I did lots of therapy, I worked on lots of things, and it became apparent that from those 5 things, that were 2 that I wanted to do: teach that chaplain course and work as a chaplain part-time. Now, that was a big switch, not just where I'm ending up now, but the in-between time, to actually say, instead of, oh, I can do this and this, to stop the frantic doing and just work on being. Now, Mountain Vista UU has gone through many transitions as well. The first time I attended, this congregation was actually meeting at Cross Middle School. I don't know how many of you went that far back. And they were hoping to find and buy a building that would house them more appropriately than the shared space they were in. Sound familiar? So later at the Cromwell address, we transitioned through various building plans and got discouraged again and again by the many codes and zoning laws that prevented us from doing what we wanted to do. We sold the property, we bought land, then their rules and codes changed and the land was not viable, so it's for sale. I don't know the status of that one. First, we met at Greenfields School for a while, and then sharing space with a Lutheran church right here. The search team is still actively exploring new options to house our congregation. And in the middle of that transition, our minister, Ron Ferris, felt inspired. He only applied at one church. I was going to say in this country, but no, it's in Canada. So he and his family are moving to Vancouver, and he will serve a UU church there. Transitions wherever we look. So, for many years, this church was served by the Reverend Susan Menker Seal, I think 14 years, if I counted right. After which we transitioned to an intern minister, Joy Atkinson. After which we did search and found Ron Ferris, who was here for 7 years. And here we are again. We will soon get to know our new interim minister, Reverend Samantha Wilson, and everything I've heard about her is very exciting, so I look forward to that time. And who knows where we will go from there. The one way Mountain Vista UU is not in transition is that we continue as a loving and welcoming community. We continue to gather here with all our fears or upset or concerns, whatever is going on in the world or in our lives. We gather here and we find peace together. We find deep caring. We get to explore meaning together. That's not in transition. So how do we survive transitions without too much hurt and loss? What is the message that we can take from these many transitions? I came up with a couple of things and I'll share them with you. Some transitions feel like they're destroying you. They certainly can humble you. We had been overconfident, thinking after we raised Hannah, we could handle anything. And we assumed naively that the adoption agency would tell us the truth about the sibling group. And they hadn't. Looking back, I guess they were afraid that if they told us the special needs and the whole list of their issues, we might not take those kids. And they really wanted us to take those kids. So it was over the next year that we slowly found out a few things, and as time passed, all the issues they had to deal with. And we had not thought ahead at all. We raised Hannah, she made it to adulthood, she was on her own. What did we think? That she would live forever? That she would not get seriously ill? This was before there were a lot of medications available, and the ones that were available made her even more sick. So she could only be on those for short periods of time. But we hadn't considered her moving back in. We hadn't considered that hospice usually happens in somebody's home, and that her little apartment was not ideal for that because she lived by herself. We were suddenly not only in transition, but in crisis, with our 2 young children showing the challenges they had while caring for a dying 22-year-old who wanted to stay alive. After that trauma and loss, my whole theology was in transition for quite a while. Now, I also learned that transitions that feel like they can destroy us can also be followed by other transitions that can be good for us. My ever-evolving faith brought me to Unitarian Universalism, for which I'm very grateful. And it brought me to you specifically. At the time, you were called the UU Congregation of Northwest Tucson. And that's where I became a UU, much inspired by our minister and by all of you who were there. There, I could find my desire to be a minister yet again, because I'd been turned down by several denominations after taking their graduate courses. So yes, I had to go back to seminary, take a bunch of UU courses this time, and amazingly, well, there was a 1-year internship, but then qualify for ordination. That was a good transition. I accepted. Another point is transitions are easier if we accept what might happen. With our oldest Hannah, I knew from the start she wasn't a keeper, but we'd gotten so used to her recovering from whatever infections she had. It kind of went to the back of our minds, but it helped during her 6 months of hospice to come to terms with losing her. That made that transition a lot easier. When our youngest died in a car accident, her being a pedestrian, that was tougher because we had no prep time. Eventually, a couple of years after losing her, that's when we slowed down and stopped everything and took time to recuperate. And I'm grateful for that. And then slowly starting our life up again. Accepting even the ways in which we had fallen apart, medically and emotionally, was important. And accepting that made that transition easier as well. Now, I now work as a hospice chaplain. I used to say I could never do that work, even though I was training chaplains, because of the tough hospice our oldest had. When I worked for different congregations, I would at times visit people in hospices, and there was this one agency that had the best facilities and support. So I applied at Casa de la Luz, and they were very happy to have me with them. That transition went well. I actually learned things working in that hospice that helped. I learned to walk with death as a companion, to not go into crisis mode when there was an impending death. And it helped heal some of my hurts from our past grief. Now, I'm very grateful for that. And gratitude is a wonderful cure for challenging transitions. That brings significant healing. So I'm very grateful for healing that happens even after deep grief and tough transitions. And I'm grateful for my beloved UU congregation. I am actually quite excited about the transitions that we're facing now. I'm excited about a new minister. I'm excited about interesting guest speaker over the next couple of months. And I can't wait to see where we will end up moving to next. Those are good things, because again, we are a beloved community. We care about each other deeply. And we are welcoming. So I have no doubt that we will continue and flourish wherever we land. In the meantime, accepting changes and deep gratitude can hold us safely in place. And whatever you wrote where you find stillness, that can help too. May it be so. Amen. And blessed be. Please join, oh no, we're not doing that yet. All right, Robin, please come up.